So the second part is called Valaquenta, and this part is basically building upon Ainur Valier. So from Ainur Valier we had Ilúvatar creating the world and accidentally on purpose also making sure Melkor had the freedom to rebel. Definitely Ilúvatar knew exactly what he was doing when he let Melkor do his thing, let them go create the world, and he was just sitting back with popcorn and a Coke and just loving it. You know what I was thinking about Ainur Valier and the music of the Ainur over the past week when I was just like reflecting on how lots of worlds are built. We don't really get many worlds that are being built by something that a god has created. Like the world was built indirectly, like Ea was built indirectly by the Ainur or the Valar, and not directly by Ilúvatar, and that's quite unusual. I also find it interesting, so the secret fire was sent to burn at the heart of the world. I find it interesting that the fire is at the heart of the world and that Melkor is the Ainur who seems to represent fire, so that's, I don't know. It's not a coincidence, I assume. But this chapter, so Valaquenta, which is, all these chapters are super short in the Silmarillion, but super dense. You have to read them twice to really get your head around it. But this chapter, Valaquenta, is basically an introduction to the Pantheon of Lord of the Rings, or of Middle-earth, or the world, Ea. The elves call it Arda, right? They call the world Arda? I think so. Yes, Arda, the realm. But it is a very different pantheon to what I'm used to dealing with. Norse mythology, the Greek pantheon. There is a lot less sex and cheating going on in this pantheon. It's very tame. There's lots of drama, but there's no like relationship issues, except maybe a little bit of tension between Manwe and Varda and Melkor. But in general, it's very tame. It's very Tolkien. Like, there's no Valar procreating with elves or humans to make half demigod things. And that's probably just as well. If Melkor had kids, that would have been really bad. But he wouldn't have, because at the end of the day, he wouldn't have wanted anyone to challenge his power. As you read through the chapter, you get an introduction to the 14 Valar, and then also I believe the Maiar, almost like reading an encyclopedia. And then you can go and like look this up and have the list of the names to remind yourself. But I did find some incredibly beautiful fan art. So I'll bring this one up. It's, and I will link these all. This one is by enanoakd. And you can see the genealogy here is that these 14, interestingly, this artist has chosen to center the sort of pantheon between Manwe and Ulmo, which is fine, but I thought it might be Manwe and Varda, but that's okay. Sort of does make sense because I think these were the two most powerful after Melkor. As you can see, none of these Valar have any offspring coming after them. Their line ends with themselves wherever they happen to be dwelling now. So this is in comparison to, this is just an example, just a quick example. This here from my ancient Roman Greek mythology book here. This is the genealogy. I'll take a photo and put it up. This is the genealogy of like ancient Greek gods, and you can see at a glance Zeus's name pop up at least 6 or 7 times, and like he got around. But no one's doing that in this pantheon. Who would be the crazy promiscuous one who got around in this pantheon? I would like to say that it would be Melkor, just because that would be his way of manipulating people, like, hey, we have a kid together, so like, you know, maybe you shouldn't be awful to me and maybe you should do what I say. I think Melkor would have been the one that was fucking around. But convince me otherwise. I'm happy to be convinced that it's someone else. Someone else's there's use of this pantheon. Kids coming out of everywhere. Anyway, I'm assuming there were no kids in this pantheon. I haven't read the rest of the Silmarillion, but I don't see that happening. This is Tolkien. This is Tolkien, okay? What do I want to say? So I'm immediately obsessed, definitely, between the dynamics between Melkor, Manwë, and Melkor, Manwë, and Varda, who so Melkor and Manwë are described as brethren in the thought of Iluvatar. So Iluvatar really put Melkor and Manwë in the same box, which I imagine Melkor was furious about, and Manwë probably wasn't too happy about either, but I don't think Manwë ever got annoyed at Iluvatar for doing what he did, because he would just obediently follow and loved him. And then they were kind of like the three of them, including Varda, and Varda has my favourite description, I think, of all of them. The Lady of the Stars. The Lady of the Stars, who knows all the regions of air, too great is her beauty to be declared in the words of men or of elves, for the light of Iluvatar still lives in her face. In light is her power and her joy. I think any god who is like the star god is just so cool. So Varda rejected Melkor early on, and from what I've learned is that I don't know if we necessarily learn more about what happened there. So she saw darkness in him and rejected him immediately, which is not helping the situation. Once again, like, maybe she contributed to his descent. And so Manwë and Varda live together, and I really love how we've got they can combine their powers so that Manwë can see further with Varda by his side, and Varda can hear clearer with Manwë at his side. And the elves hold the Varda in most reverence and love, and they called her Elbereth. Manwë, there's some great fan art of Manwë. This is by DiamondStarr. Absolutely beautiful. So this is the air god. Of course, air is always such a cool element to be. Of all of the elements like fire, wind, water, and earth, I always find air is, you know, it's in the sky, it's in the clouds, it always has that ethereal power associated with it, so I can see why Manwë is the king. Although I'm pretty sure at some point in this chapter, I'll see if I can find it. Yeah, Manwë is dearest to Iluvatar and understands most clearly his purposes. So Manwë is the most close of all of the Ainur who seem to understand what Iluvatar wants and drives that forward, like what he really wants, which is kind of a little bit screwed up, because if you think about that, if we're saying that Iluvatar wanted to create an imperfect world, Arda, by making sure that Melkor kind of screwed it up, that means that Manwë was on board with that. I mean, well, isn't it? Because I cannot help but think, can they die? Why didn't they just gang up and kill Melkor? That would have solved a lot of issues. No, Manwë knew that what Melkor was doing must have been within Iluvatar's designs, which is kind of screwed up. Let it happen. Let him kill all these people in Middle-earth. We will sit here and watch. Anyway, some more fan art, and this one, The Lord of the Breath of Arda. This is by Sepide-Donne. And here is another one, King of the Valar by Prophet Queen. I'm assuming that Manwë gets represented by an eagle and feathers quite a lot. And this is just beautiful. Love it. And just because I think Varda is so cool, I gotta show you this. This is also by Sepide-Donne. Honestly, it takes my breath away to see this, because if you just look at this photo, there's literally a galaxy and constellations in her dress, and that is just brilliant. I don't know if I'm being manipulated by Tolkien or manipulated by Melkor, but at this point of the story, I'm still like kind of feeling sorry for Melkor, because I still think a lot of this just was not his fault, and it could have been so different if things had been differently. Sure, of course, we are all responsible for the actions that we take, no matter how terrible our circumstances are. Yes, that is the moral of the story that Melkor clearly didn't get. But it's still kind of sucky when he's given the most power, but then is repeatedly shut down for being creative. So Ulmo is the next in power beyond Melkor and Manwë, and he is the water god. He's also a loner. He's happy by himself, and he never really ended up taking like a elven body, human-y form. He seems to be very neutral, which is, I appreciate, which is kind of like he's not really in on the whole hierarchy under Manwë, but also he's not interested in Melkor. He is water, and water is, you know, it separates the borders between lands, different land masses. It's a good metaphorical representation of Ulmo's stance politically, if I can say that. And there is another little bit of fan art here, which I really appreciate, and I think you will as well. Absolutely beautiful. But Ulmo is standing kind of alone by himself and looking the other direction. I also find it really interesting that all of these three people, all of the Valar here, are all kind of together-ish, except the three that aren't is Melkor, who's standing looking over kind of annoyed, Ulmo, who's just like, ugh, why do I have to deal with all this? And Nienna, who is the sort of like the goddess of death equivalent, is also kind of alone, which is a bit sad too. Aule also is someone Melkor doesn't like, because Aule was most like himself in thought and powers. I do wonder if it was because of this that Melkor was thinking, okay, fine, I'm going to corrupt his underlings then, when he was jealous. There's also quite a few more named Valar. You've got Yavanna, who's kind of like the resident Mother Earth, and Mother of Moss upon stones, all the small and secret things in mould. A lot of these Valar seem to come in sort of paired couples, except for Orome, who has a horse and a horn, and also Nienna. And we've got one for dreams and spirits and dancing, and then pity, and Nienna is certainly an interesting one. We have a read about what is said regarding her. She dwells alone, she's acquainted with grief, and mourns for every wound that Arda has suffered in the marring of Melkor. Okay, does she mourn for Melkor as well? Does her pity extend that far? What do you think, Nienna? So great was her sorrow that as the music unfolded, her song turned to lamentation long before its end, and the sound of mourning was woven into the themes of the world before it began. So as the world was getting created and a lot of stuff was going wrong, she wove like mourning and pity and sadness into the world. Jeez. She brings strength to the spirit and turns sorrow to wisdom. So that is her thing. That is the thing that she likes to do, is to help people learn, get through things, and become wise because of suffering. I definitely think that of all of the people who should have gone to Melkor to try to convince him to just chill the F out, Nienna should have gone. For starters, because I don't think she would have been... I still don't know the story. I'm just gonna stop making up an entire story in my head. Let's stick to on point. Oh my gosh. Anyway, we do get to the point where Tolkien even says that a lot of this is, you know, still very mysterious, and this is what the Eldar knew in Aman, but little was really said about them overall. And then we've got the Maiar, so who are kind of the next hierarchy below, and Osse, is that how we say his name? Yeah, I'd say Osse, who was kind of like alongside Ulmo with his water, but was more interested in like tidal powers and storms. He was tempted at one point by Melkor, and that's quite interesting because eventually he was pulled back away from Melkor, but note that the delight in violence has never wholly departed from him, and at times he will rage in his willfulness without any command from Ulmo his lord. It's so crazy how the resolve of all of the other Valar who just barely were tempted by Melkor. But yeah, we do find out that he managed to tempt a lot of the Maiar, including Ossé, who didn't end up going over. But then there was lots of others that are not named that he pulled underneath him, who I think he said that some of them turned into like fire spirits, like the Balrog. So Melkor does not like Ulmo at all. I'm assuming because Ulmo can't even be controlled by Manwe very well, so Melkor's like, I'm not even gonna try with him. Seas are uncontrollable and violent. I really like Olorin, who dwelt with Lorien, who is the master of visions and dreams. That in particular caught my attention. I have no idea if he'll ever be mentioned again, but the reason this took my attention is because of Olorin, tales don't speak, for though he loved the elves, he walked among them unseen or in form as one of them. So he actually walked among the elves as an elf. And they did not know whence came the fair visions or the promptings of wisdom that he put into their hearts. And then it goes on to say, those who listened to him awoke from despair and put away the imaginations of darkness. So I imagine Olorin is the demigod of, you know, when you just need someone to come in and say the right thing to you. And as soon as someone says the right thing, you're like, of course, what are we doing? That is the right thing to do. That's what we need to do. Olorin is the one who's whispering that in your head. I really like that he actually walked among elves. I hope we get more of him in the story to come, but I'm not sure if we will. Where was Olorin when Annatar and Sauron were struggling with life? Could he have been there? So we get back to Melkor and talking about Melkor, and basically he's just descending further and further. He basically gets to the point where he turned to subtlety in perverting his own will, but then it got worse and he became a liar without shame. So eventually, at the beginning, he maybe was a little bit shameful, but then when you lose the shame, shameless evil, evil with shamelessness is as dangerous evil, essentially. He descended to fire and wrath. And we find out that he actually held dominion over most of the land in Arda by himself and all the people that he tempted. So many Maiar were drawn to his splendor, but also he tempted many, including a spirit called Sauron. So we don't know, like, Sauron isn't a Maiar. He's also not an elf. Is he? Among those of his servants that have names, the greatest was that spirit whom the Eldar called Sauron, or Gorthour the Cruel. Was he a Maiar, Sauron? I'm assuming that that's a yes. So Sauron, we find out, was actually underneath Aule. But so this chapter ends on such a negative note, which is basically, we also find out that Melkor is known as Morgoth, and I had heard of Morgoth before. I thought there might have been a hierarchy where Melkor taught Morgoth and then Morgoth taught Sauron, but no, they're the same person. There's a really cool line here that is, Sauron was only less evil than his master in that for long he served another and not himself. Like, you know that you're pretty evil when the only thing that redeems you is that at one point you were only serving evil and not the evil itself. Or really, that's actually a big redeeming point. But we don't really know how much of Sauron's descent was entirely Melkor's or Morgoth's doing. And there would have been a point of no return, maybe. Are we going to find out more about Sauron? I assume we're going to find out a lot more about Sauron in this. But in after years, he rose like a shadow of Morgoth and a ghost of his malice and walked behind him on the same ruinous path down into the void. Here ends the Valaquenta. And on that note, we go to the beginning of days. Wow. I think I'm finding out the moral of the story is that Melkor could have been the king of all if he just didn't desire it, which is, a common trope these days. yes, this was a much more casual tone than the last video that I did. Some of you may have noticed. If not, I'm just going to roll with what I do. See you later.